Hello, it's National Pollinators Week, and I'm Hayes Jackson. I'm the director here at Longleaf Botanical Garden, and I'm also the county agent with Urban Horticulture with the Alabama Cooperative Extension. And I have a special guest today. It's Susan Gibbins, who has been with the Botanical Garden at the beginning, has served as a board member and is also on our education committee. And she's going to do a program today about bees and beehives. So I'm going to turn it over to Susan, and I'm going to let you take it, and we'll run with it and talk about the bees for Pollinator Week.
Well, I've been interested in bees as long as I can remember. When I was really, really young, I can remember sitting out in the yard watching the bees collecting nectar from plants. And I also remember, I guess I must have tried to touch them or something. This was like kindergarten, first grade, because I would get stung and go screaming in the house. And I remember being told, you're gonna have to learn to leave those bees alone. Well, I've never learned to leave the bees alone. I really think bees are fascinating. So today, I'm going to try to share with you some of the stuff I've learned about bees. Particularly the hive that they use. That's kind of what I'm going to focus on today. It's kind of hard to imagine, but people have not had sweet things for very long. You know, we all get our cookie after dinner and a candy bar here and there, but sweets were a luxury, and honey, being intensely sweet, was a super luxury. And so, everybody wanted honey. And how many people have ever even seen a wild hive? They're not easy to find. And in the long ago, when people found a hive, it was a deep, dark secret because they didn't want to tell anybody because they didn't want to share. And of course, the honey was expensive and it could have been sold as well. So after a while, people started trying to attract bees to where they were so that it would be close at hand, and also so that they could get to the honey. And they used, you've seen those grass bee skips, and they used big clay pots and all sorts of things, and the bees would set their hive up in there. Well, that was great, except when they decided it was time to get some honey, they had to destroy the container that it was in, which meant destroying the bees and their hive, which was very hard on them. Then in 1851, a man by the name of L.L. Langstroth devised the hive that we have today. And he figured out that bees needed 1/4 inch space to travel around in their hive. And that's part of the principle that he used in designing this hive. And so what we're going to do is take a hive and put it together and talk about what happens in each part. Okay? All right, let's look at the parts of a beehive and put one together and talk about what happens in each part. The first part we're going to use is imaginary, and that's the hive stand. Usually it's 2 concrete blocks, and I decided I wasn't going to lug 2 concrete blocks in here. Sometimes also there's a metal stand or other things that you can use. But just to get it up off the ground, at least 12 inches, and fix it so that it's slanting forward a little bit so that any water will drain out. So we now have our imaginary blocks, and on top of that, we're going to put this, which is the board, on the bottom, and you can see it's got a screen on it to hopefully keeps other things out. Lots of things like to go inside of a beehive, and also to allow for some ventilation. On top of that will fit the hive body. And you can see it fits right on top of there, leaving a little opening for bees to come and go. Inside of the hive these hanging frames, and they start off with a wax form, and you can see this wax form is in little six-sided cells. And the six-sided cells, the bees will add to that and draw it out into little capsules. And everything that's stored in the beehive will be in there. When they bring water, when they bring nectar, when they bring pollen, when the queen lays the eggs, and the developing larvae all of that will happen in those cells. Actually, these cells will only have the babies in it, the eggs and the babies in it, and the reason for that is it's called a queen excluder, and it fits on top of there. Now this means that the queen, when she comes in, she pretty much stays in there, but while she's in there, she'll be laying eggs in those big frames that I just showed you. And she can't get up to this next compartment, which is on top, which is where the honey is stored. So she cannot get the worker bees are small enough to go through those little slats, but the queen has to stay down below. Now up here we have the same thing that we had down below, except they're a little smaller, and they will have they can be plain, or they'll have that, the plastic that goes on it, that's the pattern for, well here it is right here, the pattern for the cells. This is where the honey will be stored, and you can, when this one fills up, you can put another one on. When that one fills up, you can put another one on. If you decide you want some honey, you can take one of them out, steal a little from your bees, and get the honey out of that. Or you can just leave them on. During the winter, if the honey is taken out, in the spring during the winter, you'll leave some of these on here so that the bees will have something to eat during the winter when there's not anything to collect as far as flowers and plants are concerned. All right, so here you'll have, let's just go back over it. Here's the entrance, and here's the brood hive where the babies are developing. There's a queen excluder in here, and then you'll start building up the sections that the honey will be stored in. On top of that will be the inner cover. Got just a little hole in it, and it will fit on top of that. And then the telescoping cover will fit on top of that. It's got a little insulation in it, pretty thick and heavy. Sometimes a beekeeper will put some bricks on top of there to help hold it down, and also to little communication reminders for the beekeeper. If you've got 80 hives, it's hard to remember which one, so sometimes it'll be a signal that something needs to be done to this beehive. Then this is used at the entrance. You can see the small hole and then a larger opening. In the winter, the small hole will let bees in and out, but it'll also keep out the cold air. And then it can be turned over if you want a larger one. One other thing that's involved with this beehive that you might, in the winter or during a time if you need to feed the bees a little extra, make up a sugar water solution and it'll fit right under there. Now that we've talked about all the parts of the beehive and how they work, what each one does, let's look at a beehive that's been assembled and kind of summarize what we've learned so far. All right, so we know about the bottom board down here. We know that the bees go in and out right here, flying in and out. And this is the entrance to the hive. And they're going into this big super down at the bottom. And you know that they're hanging frames in that super. We know that right in here is the queen excluder. And so that keeps the queen and workers down here. Workers can keep coming up here, but the queen stays down there. Now what's happening down here, if you remember, is that baby bees are, this is called the brood chamber, and baby bees are developing from hatched eggs and turning into adult bees. So down here, you will have the hanging frames with the comb on it, with the developing bees. Workers will be crawling all over, taking care of the babies, taking care of the queen, and the queen will be going from cell to cell to cell to cell, laying her millions of eggs that she does in her lifetime. Now, the next frame, you can see the separation right here, will have also the same frames that you had down here, made of wax, 6-sided frames that are capped. But up here, there will only be honey developing in there because, of course, as we said, the queen's down here, can't come up here. So this is where your honey will be developing. And then there will be a third frame up here, and you can, when this fills up, you can add this third frame, and it will fill up with honey. And then if you want to, you can do a fourth and a fifth and a sixth, as long as you can balance it up there. Let's imagine that I'm a beekeeper, and I'm about to rob the bees of some honey. All right, we said the baby bees are here, the bees' honey is here. It's saved for them for the winter and for them to use during the time. Remember, all those workers have to eat, and the queen has to eat as she's developing. And this up here will be the honey for the beekeeper. All right, so let's say he's decided, or she has decided, that it's time for a little bit of honey to be gathered. So we'll take this telescoping top off. We'll take the inner cover off. We will be looking inside. There will be the frames, the 6-sided frames. I'll be hanging in here, one beside the other. They'll be full of honey and covered with bees. Now, before we reach in and take that out, we'll take a little bit of smoke, our smoker, and we'll poof, poof, poof. This calms the bees for some reason. Nobody is sure exactly why. There are lots of theories. Probably the best theory is that bees communicate with scent. And when you have all that smoke, it blocks their interception of different scents that give them messages. And so they don't know what to do, and so they're calm. And that gives the beekeeper enough time to get what he wants out of here without them becoming upset. So reach in, take out this, be covered with bees and full of honey, very heavy. The beekeeper will take his bee brush and very gently brush the bees off back down into the hive. And then he'll take this over and put it in where he's collecting them. And he'll do that and take as many out as he wants to. And then add more that the bees can refill to be removed at a later date. So this is the beauty of this beehive, that we can take honey out for our use and put back in the frame for the bee to refill. We haven't killed any bees, we haven't destroyed any of their property, and it works for everybody. So now we see why this beehive has lasted for over 150 years. It makes us happy, and it makes the bees happy.